I'm intrigued by your work in creativity. As My own background is that I've been researching creativity for a number of years now, and everyone seems to have their own unique definition of creativity, even though they usually include the concepts of novelty in some way and value. And I saw your video where you talk about the relationship between creativity and diversity. And I also advocate the importance of diversity. So I'm intrigued to hear you elaborate on that further, Dr. Majlergaard.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. As you may know, I have been, and my colleagues in cooking, that we have been working with companies all over the world for the past 15, 16 years. And many of these companies will help working with leveraging the cultural diversity. And one of the things that we have found out that companies who are international, who are multicultural, that they are very good at, if they do it correctly, is to boost innovation, boost creativity in a very unique way. And when you bring people together with different perspectives, extraordinary things happen because you see things in different ways. You see things in a multi-dimensional way, and that creates new solutions, new opportunities, and you become much better at not only creating new things, you also become much better at foresee potential challenges and risks when you have a multicultural team.
A lot of people think of it as conflict, and there's a lot of organizations that don't tolerate conflict very much. And perhaps you'll agree with me that it's only when we have conflict, it's like sharpening that diamond. You know, the diamond needs to have some friction, because without the friction, it's not going to become more refined. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with you on that. And many of the companies we work with, for instance, companies in the high-tech sector and IT sector, where you usually have, not to make any stereotype, but you usually have a group of male engineers in the same age range. And when they're going to be creative together, it's not really going that well, because they all have the same background. They come from the same social sphere. They have the same education, and they have the same outlook at the world. So the scope that they have, the width they have on their radar screen is very, very narrow compared to if you have a multicultural team with people with much more diverse background who can ask questions you will never ask if you, let's say you're together with a lot of other engineers, you're an engineer and you're together with a lot of other engineers. You will never ask questions that is outside your frame of reference for what kind of questions you would ask as an engineer. And that goes for all types of professions, anywhere. So bringing in diversity and having people who ask questions that you would usually not ask elsewhere, they are very, very important. Just like having children around. I think it was Einstein who said, as long as children can ask questions that no adults can answer, there's a need for research.
That's interesting. Yes, I hadn't heard that before, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But talking about diversity, over the last 5-6 years that I've been researching the concept, what I've noticed is that the majority of creativity researchers tend to be, like yourself, white males. And we know that there's such a diverse perspective on creativity between the East and the West, for example. What's your experience as being someone who really advocates creativity? Have you noticed this kind of dominance of the Western culture in creativity?
Not necessarily, because it depends on where your starting point is. For instance, we've been working with a number of sub-Saharan companies who are trying to develop new ways of developing the agriculture industry. They're not influenced by Western values. But of course, if you talk about IT and you talk about technology, that's pretty much developed in Europe and United States. So for that reason, it still has a dominance in that sense. The other stereotypes I see around creativity is that we very often hear about diversity when we're talking about diversity, that very often the discussion is only about bringing more women in if it's a male-dominated world. But creativity and diversity is much more than that, because it is correct that you often hear the argument that if you bring more women into a male-dominated space, engineers, IT professionals, or whatever, that you get more creativity, that you get better results. But that actually goes for any kind of diversity. So we should open up and look at any kind of diversity actually benefits the creative process. It could be bringing more elderly people into the creative process. It could be bringing younger people in, depending on what kind of industry we're in. It could be bringing people in with a completely different industry experience. All sorts of diversity creates better innovative results. So I think we benefit a lot of opening up to that, and not only see that as a gender perspective.
Absolutely. It's not just a gender perspective, it's also race and age and all sorts of other different things. And one of my intentions behind creating this conference is that I'm bringing together the different cultures of academia, pedagogy, and entrepreneurship, because even in those are also distinct cultures. And I find that very often the academics end up talking to academics, and it's a very different conversation to the conversation that they have when they're talking with entrepreneurs or with educators who are actually responsible for teaching these skills to the new generations, as opposed to Go ahead.
Or talk to people with no education at all in that particular field, because just like children, when you don't have educated knowledge about a particular field, you ask questions that people who have educated knowledge will never ask.
Absolutely. So I find that a lot of entrepreneurs, they have a very negative experience of education because it didn't really speak to them, and they gained most of their real world experience outside of the formal education system. And so another reason for finding a way that their voices are heard, because academia and the voices of those who they still have a negative attitude towards education, those voices, when they converse with each other, that's when we get the creativity, because the diverse perspectives rub together and they, we find new angles of seeing things.
That's right. But on the other hand, the entrepreneurs, they have a good cause and a good case, because there is a lot of evidence showing that the more education you have, the more risk averse you are, and the less likely it is that you will succeed as an entrepreneur. Many of these entrepreneurs we have seen succeeding forever. They have been succeeding because they were in some kind of pain, that they had to fight the establishment and use the personal resources they had to actually achieve something. And you can say that the education systems in many parts of the world, in most parts of the world actually, is based on doing things right, that you get punished for making failures. And when you are an entrepreneur, you make failures, you don't succeed the first time. So if you fit into the established educational system where you get marks for doing things right, it's unlikely that you will succeed as an entrepreneur. So I think if we could combine education with entrepreneurship, we need to change the way that we grade and measure successful academia, not for doing things right, but for having the courage to try out new things.
That's true. And this is where the educators, there's a problem there, because in the current educational system, there's a lot of focus on efficiency, competitiveness, and having tangible outcomes. And so teachers who take risks are not necessarily the ones who are most valued, because in taking risks, they might not have the best success rate, because you've seen, so they could lose their jobs because they've been too creative. They've taken their students out on trips, they've given them experiential knowledge, but at the end of it, it doesn't result in something tangible. It could result in something very deep learning, but the evidence of that will be in the years, in future years, not necessarily right away. And so the current education system isn't set up to promote creativity in that respect.
No, the current education system, all places I know of, is set up to provide educated workforce for the industry and the established industry, not for people to create new things or break the rules or take the society in a different direction. And when you want to take the society in a different direction, if you want to break the rules, you want to try out some new things, you don't get any points from the established educational system anywhere.
That's right. So the purpose of, state-funded education is usually to produce citizens that will fit into the system where they are needed.
Yeah, who shut up and keep their mouth shut, pay their taxes, and do not fight the system.
That's right. So it's so those of us who want to teach creatively, those of us who are creatives, it's having to create our own place in society rather than just accepting the place that has been arranged for us.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I have a lot of students around me. That's why I don't have a regular job as a professor, but only as a visiting professor, because then I can tell the students that most of the education that they have paid a lot of money to get is waste of money, waste of time. And the most important things they're going to learn in life, they're going to learn that outside the established educational system. So we need new educational systems that are not government controlled, not controlled by the big industries, who can really teach people to get the courage to break the norms, break the rules, break the conversions, and try out new things.
Yes, and there's a lot of focus nowadays on education in a box, education that has become so systemized that the teacher has become almost redundant. And there's large scale operations carried on in Africa, for example, where it's a lot of the American or the European education is being put into a box, as it were, mechanized, systemized education.
And it's just too much time for the people who have developed it, and they're playing on people's fear.
Yes. So they're playing on people's fear. And so the profit, so it's education for profit. In the past, academia kind of was very distinct from the business world. It's only recently that the MBA programs and business studies have become such a large feature in academia. But there was a time when there was a drive to keep academics away from the profit motive. That's possible.
That's right. And
both. You're both an academic and you're also an entrepreneur. So how do you deal with that conflict of is your motive to make profit, or is your motive to raise the level of awareness, education? Is it a purely academic motive, or is it a purely entrepreneurial motive where it's about making a profit margin?
You're going to say my consulting firm, Guggen, is about helping companies leveraging the cultural diversity in whatever way that they're trying to do it. And we do that. The reason why I'm involved in academia is because I want to do it in a different way. I don't want anyone to tell me what to say and what to do. And of course, I charge as much as possible when doing my courses. But I do tell my students exactly what I told you before, that most of the formal education is waste of time, it's waste of money. And I'm a firm believer that we learn things when we need to learn them. That you can go to school forever learning a language, for instance, and you will never adopt that language. You'll never learn that language until you end up in that particular country where you need to speak the language in order to make a living or whatever. So I do my teaching, but I'm doing a lot of counseling. I'm doing a lot of promotion to make students believe that it's not a one path. Because the parents are telling them to get an education, the most important thing. Usually parents without higher education are the most rigid ones who really want their kids to get an education because they believe that it's a kind of a key to success in a future corporate environment. But the world has changed. The world has changed a lot. There are new opportunities, new cracks in societies. The societies are developing. So instead of having that kind of formal education, the kids should pursue their dreams. And when they need something, if they want something, they will learn what it takes to get there outside the formal educational system. So to be really, really rude, I think much of the formal education globally is a big money scam.
Yes. Well, and it takes great courage to actually say it in those words. And
I can say that because I'm not involved in it. I'm only a visiting professor.
Yeah, that's true. So you see, so whereas if you had your tenure to, you had the security of a job and you were relying on a pension, then it would be a lot more difficult to.
Well, that's why I'm not doing it. I get a lot of proposals from universities and business schools that they would like to employ me full time, but I say no every time because I want my freedom to express what I'm expressing right now.
Yeah. Well, one of the professors at the university that I'm linked with said something similar, but I think he was trying to express the fact that we currently it's like mass production, isn't it? Universities have become like factories, mass producing, and the product that we're churning out is these degrees. And I suppose, as you say, I agree with you that it's those parents who haven't had a university education themselves. They are the ones who are so eager, so keen to make sure that their children take a different position in society. It's almost as if having a degree gives you the right to take up a different position, one that wasn't reserved for their parents.
Yes. But things are changing a lot. The recruiting systems are becoming much more sophisticated, where they check candidates for instance, cultural fit before skills fit. And you can in today's environment, you can acquire skills in so many different ways that you don't have to do it in a formal educational system. Actually, I am kind of sometimes believe that it's kind of a pillow for a lot of young people that they think just because they have an education, they have a degree from an established educational system, that they can get a job without thinking about the personality or thinking about working hard, thinking about being creative, things like that. I think that's a big problem that the parents and the society have told them, as long as you just get an education, then you're safe. It's not like that. There's a lot of unemployed, newly educated, well-educated people around the world, especially in Europe and the United States, and we are seeing the same patterns developing in India and China.
Although to argue, the contrasting view, having a university degree should enable you to think in a certain way, to have the discipline to write assignments, to do the research. So intrinsically, there are opportunities to learn a lot of skills. Because I know when I graduated a long time ago with my psychology degree, people at that time were saying, well, it doesn't really matter what degree you have, because the employer's just looking for the fact that you've committed 3 years of your life to thinking. And that's what they were recruiting you for, is your ability to think in a logical way, for example, not necessarily in a creative way, but at least logically.
Logically and academically and analytical way. I totally agree with you, but you gave the contra-argument yourself a few minutes ago that many of these business schools and universities have turned into factories where the aim is just producing candidates, and then measured by how many candidates they produce, because there are commercial institutions. We have a lot less tenure track positions at universities around the world right now than we had 10 years ago. So there's not this free thinking, there's not that strive for how do we create a better world, how do we create a more sustainable world. It's all about just meeting the criteria to get that particular degree within the system. So I think it was right 10 years ago, but unfortunately, I think it's going in the wrong direction.
So what are you doing in terms of transforming the culture and being unique and adding value? In what way are you shifting the culture so that it does go in the right direction?
Well, I'm trying to do as much as I and my colleagues in Google can by remaining independent. And all the academic teaching I do is only on short-term contracts, and it's only job by job assignment. The other thing we do is we do a lot of corporate training for corporates who want to think differently, who want to have a new approach, who want to rethink ways of doing things, and we invite a lot of people to participate in these workshops that we do, both as participants but also as facilitators. And one of the big things we are thinking about right now, we're based in southern France, that's why it's very warm right now. We are thinking about buying a huge chateau not far from Nice, where we have our headquarters. And we're thinking about creating this global leadership development center where we can develop leaders from around the world in a very, very different way, hopefully free of commercial interest. But of course, we should have our costs covered from the fees that people are paying.
Yes, that's the thing, isn't it? It's always that balance of, the profit versus the social entrepreneurship. So, that sounds very, very interesting. So, in terms of social entrepreneurship, I think maybe that's where there's this, that's where the academia and entrepreneurship could meet, because one is really interested in the ethical foundation for it, and the other one is interested in making it profitable, so the prosperity motive. But it's getting that balance right, isn't it?
It is. There's always a balance, but it's not new. It's always been like that. That's why the balanced scorecard system was invented 40 years ago. But because companies, when they started moving from having a pure profit orientation, needed to be a good citizen as well, need to be a good employer, and all that kind of things where they had to take all the stakeholders into consideration. It's nothing new. But the thing is that I think it's just the education system is very similar to the undertaking business, that you address people who are in a very vulnerable situation, that these young people and their parents, they are so afraid of not making it. And especially in countries where you pay a lot of tuition fees to get your education, these young people, they are so afraid of letting their parents down. So they are willing to pay, their parents are willing to pay anything, and the kids are paying a very high price in terms of taking on that huge pressure of not letting their parents down. So I think we have to rethink everything around that in a new way. That we have artificial intelligence coming up at a very rapid speed. Many of these law graduates that are coming out of the universities in the coming years, they're going to be unemployed because artificial intelligence do their job much better than they do at a much lower price. So they cannot get into the law firms, they cannot come in having the entry-level job. That's going to be the reality from a lot of well-educated young people, that the jobs that they had in the past, they're going to disappear in the future. So they have to rethink ways of doing things. They have to rethink what they really want in life and focus on what really matters and follow their passions. And if you follow your passions, no matter what way that is, you can become good at it and you can make a living. And I think we need a huge disruption in that area. I think it's only a matter of time before the education bubble is going to burst, as the economists have been writing about for a long time now.
Yes. And in addition to the passion, there has to be some value, because there is, in the personal development industry, people are always being told to follow their passion, but we have to kind of measure that with, well, the passion. We could be really passionate about playing football, or we could be passionate about, I don't know, some of our hobbies, but it's only if it's when it's useful to others, when it adds value to our society, that it becomes something that it's, worth engaging in terms of work. Otherwise, it remains a hobby. We can have passions that we express as hobbies, but the difference between something being a hobby and something being a vocation is that the vocation adds value in some way to our society.
I think that was right in the past, where value creation was associated with the amount of work you put into something. But in today, we can create a lot of financial value, at least, without having any human interaction at all. And that's why I think a lot of, at least European countries, are discussing if they should have a system where people get a base salary, no matter whether they're working or not. Because we need to disconnect that relationship between working and wealth creation, because it's not so relevant anymore. We create a lot of wealth without having any work associated with it. And that, of course, leaves a lot of people who cannot work in a traditional way, because a lot of these work functions we had in the past are going to be automated. So I think we're going to see a whole new system, a whole new distribution of wealth. And hopefully, like Holland have been a front runner on that, where there's in some parts of Holland that are giving people a base salary, no matter whether they're working in the traditional way or not. And then they can do what they want. Some companies have tried it out as well, with a fixed salary, not based on performance measures in the traditional sense. And these new ways of distributing wealth, so that we disconnect it from how much work you do it in the formal way, I think that's going to be the future. And that means that you can create value by playing football or paintings or whatever, or you can create value by develop new technologies or making new inventions in the healthcare area or whatever you want.
That sounds like a very optimistic future.
I think it's the way it has to be, because the alternative is quite bad. The alternative would be that we have a little elite of people who can do things that cannot be done by computers and artificial intelligence. Then we'll have a larger group of people who are outside. And what that group of people who are outside, what should they live from? And if we don't give them a decent living, they will start making a lot of unrest, and we will have a lot of poverty, and we don't want that either. And we have wealth enough, there's money enough. It's only a matter of distribution.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Finn Majlergaard, thank you very much for a very stimulating conversation. I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.